There. So we're talking about death, but to understand death, we first have to look at what life is. So let's see what life is first. Boom. So this is Genesis chapter 2, right in the beginning of the Bible. This is when God creates Adam, creates the first human being, all right? So this is verse 7. This is what it says. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground. So that's our physical part, right? He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and that's the spirit, which I'll explain in a second. And the man became a living being, or in some translations, it says the living soul. So let me explain all three. And I think I have a slide here. Yeah. So the dust, you know, Jesus made this sand sculpture, right? Or this mud sculpture.
Yes.
And then obviously it transformed into a body. But that sand, that dirt, represents the physical part of a human being. All right. Now the physical part can exist with the other two not existing. All right. A simple example of that is just go to a funeral, right? You go to a funeral, the casket's open, you look down, the body's there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, I'm one of those people that I look at it and I'm like, it just looks like they're sleeping.
True.
It looks like they just wake up, right? So the physical body's there, but nothing else. So the person isn't alive, but the body's there. So that's what the dust represents. The dust, the flesh represents the physical part of us, the part you can touch and see. Then the Bible says that God breathed into his nostrils, breathed into the statue, the dirt sculpture.
Yes.
The breath of life. That word breath is the Hebrew word pneuma or pneuma, which is the same word for spirit. All right. So the Holy Spirit is the holy pneuma. And when we breathe, we're breathing out pneuma, all right? Breath, air, which is why Jesus, when he's talking to Nicodemus, he actually plays with that. And he says, just like you don't know when the wind is coming or going, you don't know when the spirit is coming or going, which if you were to hear it in his language, he would say, just like you don't know when the pneuma is going back and forth, you also don't know when the pneuma is going back and forth. He's saying the same word. So it's kind of funny. But that's so when the Bible talks about the spirit of a person, right? Or, you know, we have the spirit inside of us. It can be two different things. In the physical sense, in the human being sense, it's that life force, which science to this day can't explain, right? So science can manipulate life. So they can clone, they can genetically modify, they can take something that's alive and change it, but they actually can't create life. All right. Yes. Millions of scientists all trying, you know, they try to mix chemicals together and explosions, but for some reason they can't create life. And that's because it doesn't come from earth. It comes from God. God breathed into this object, and that spark of life happened, that spirit happened. All right. So a human being is made out of flesh, the physical part. It's made out of spirit, which is that power, that life power that comes directly from God. And then we have a soul or a being. What that means is the mind. So it's not like a plant. So a plant is alive, but it doesn't think. It doesn't have thoughts. It doesn't think about tomorrow, or it doesn't realize it's alive. It's alive, but that's it. It grows and multiplies. That's it. A human being, on the other hand, has a soul. It thinks. It remembers. It plans. It has ideas. It has feelings, and so on. So animals as well have some sort of a soul, right? Because they also think and have dreams. I don't know if you've ever seen your dog dream before, but they usually like kick, you know, like, you know. So living beings, so animals, humans, have this soul, all right, which is the mind, the psyche. All right. So what we're going to look at today is when you die, what happens to the three parts of us? So what happens to us physically? What happens to the body? What happens to that spirit, that life force, that living thing that comes from God? And what happens to our mind? What happens to our being? So that really it's what, what makes you you, right? Your mind, your soul is what makes you Nancy or Jocelyn or Stephen, right? It's those specific memories and ideas and thoughts and feelings that when, they're all together makes up who you are. So for instance, when you have, you get your head, you hit your head with a metal bar and you lose all your memories, right? We know that happens, right? People lose their memories. They stop being them. They're different people, right? They act differently. They think differently. And that's because our soul, our psyche is made up of everything we've experienced, right? All of our thoughts and feelings and ideas kind of all together. When you put them all together, that's our soul. That's who we are, our thoughts, all right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to break it down into these three things. We're going to start off with the easiest one, which is the flesh. So what happens to our bodies when we die? To get the answer, we can stay in Genesis chapter 3. God actually gives us already the answer. So this is after Adam and Eve sin, and they receive their curses, right? The serpent gets cursed, Eve gets cursed, and then Adam gets cursed. So we're going to read Adam's here because it's the one that actually deals with the body, all right? So verse 19 says this: in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, all right? So that's already the first hint. We were made from the ground, right? From dirt. And then God is saying that we're going to return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you shall return. And no one has a problem with this. If a body dies or an animal dies and you don't bury it, for instance, if you just leave it there on the ground, you can see it decompose, right? The animals will come in, they start eating it, and the weather and just death kind of, the decomposition and everything like that. If you leave it long enough, that body turns to dirt, exactly where we came from, because it's the same molecules, right? We're made up of carbon and nitrogen and all of these things, which is what the dirt is made out of too, right? So when we die, our bodies turn back into dirt, which is kind of amazing, right? Because here we live, 80, 90, 100 years, and our bodies don't turn to dirt, right? They regenerate. Skin is always skin, bone is always bone, right? And yet the second we die, that decomposition begins, right? That changing back begins, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, just how God created us, right? That while we're alive, this dirt, which is what we are, stays transformed as flesh. It remains flesh until we die. And then it magically just starts decomposing back into dirt, right? So that's what happens to us physically. So now let's look at what happens with the spirit. In fact, I think the next one talks about both here. Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books in the Bible. This is written by Solomon, the wisest man in the world. And this is what he says, all right? Remember your creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. He's a poet. I'll explain what he's saying here. He's giving us cord, bowl, pitcher, and wheel. 4 things. If you notice, it goes from the most valuable to the kind of the most common, right? So a silver cord, a silver necklace kind of a thing, a golden bowl, right? A pitcher, a clay pitcher, and a rock wheel, all right? So the most valuable to the least valuable in terms of metals and that. But they all die, right? Sooner or later, that cord breaks and it's useless. Sooner or later, that golden bowl is broken. The pitcher is shattered. The wheel is broken, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're super rich, doesn't matter if you're super poor, we all die, right? That's what Solomon is saying here. At the end of the day, Sooner or later, you're gonna die. Then he tells us what happens in the physical sense and in the spiritual sense. So let's read verse 7. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was. He completely agrees with God, right? Completely agrees with the Bible. So the body goes back into dust, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. All right. So that breath of life, that life force, simply goes back to the power source, right? What's important here is the spirit is not a being. All right. It's not a mind. It doesn't have any thoughts. It doesn't have any feelings. It doesn't have any ideas. It's not a person. It's simply, think of it like electricity. All right. So you have a cell phone here. You got a cell phone. If I wait enough hours, it dies, right? The battery runs out of power. And that's because the energy just slowly dissipates. It goes away, right? So think of it as that power just goes back to God, back to the universe, kind of a thing. But if I plug it back in, it turns on. Why? Because that power is now being pumped back into the phone. Now, is the electricity alive in of itself? No, it's just power. Does the electricity have ideas? Can it go on the internet? No, it's simply the power which lets the phone have ideas and search the internet and so on. The human body is the exact same way. So we have a body, and the spirit is just our electricity. It's our power source. When we die, the power source simply goes back to God. All right. The electricity just goes back up to God. And because of that, he's a very pessimistic man, Solomon. He says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. Vanity means worthless. What's the point of life then? If you're rich, if you're poor, if you work hard, if you're lazy, it doesn't make a difference. We all die. So who cares? Like, that's kind of his message here. All right. Because it really doesn't make a difference, does it? When we die, it doesn't matter what you did. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are. The end is the same, right? Now, what's important and what's missing is salvation. He doesn't get into that. He's simply talking about this life here. This life here, you live, you die. That's it. And you can't stop it. Sooner or later, we all die. All right. So that's what he's saying in this verse. So the body goes back to dust. That power source, the electricity, that life just goes back to God, back to the generator. All right. Now let's do the body, spirit, and mind. Psalms 146. Luckily, it gives us all three in one verse. All right. So this one, possibly written by David. I'm not sure. It's 146. That's down there. It might not be. Doesn't matter. This is what the Psalms tell us from the Bible. Verse 3 first. Do not put your trust in princes, nor in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. So what it's basically saying is, you know, you have two choices in life. You can depend on God, or you can depend on human beings. Don't depend on human beings, because they're no better than you are. Right? We're all human beings. How can something that's equal to you make you better, kind of a thing, right? Instead, trust in God, who's above humanity and can lift us up. So that's what verse 3 is telling us. And then verse 4 tells us why. You know, why can't we depend on humans? Because we all end up the same, right? The spirit departs. So the spirit just disappears. It goes back to God, right? That energy force, it just departs. He returns to the earth, just like all the other verses tell us, right? We go back to dust. And in that very day, his plans or his thoughts perish or die. All right. They cease to be. This is probably the most complicated out of the three. It really isn't, but because of what we've always been taught growing up, when you watch movies, you know, what happens when you die? Your soul, your mind floats around, or like, we don't want it to die, right? We want who we are to continue on. And so we've created these stories. We've created this idea that somehow my love will continue on, you know, floating around somewhere. You've probably, you know, heard or seen horror movies where they're like, no, that house is haunted. The person that died there died angry. And so his anger is still in the house. He hasn't been appeased, right? And so, you know, his soul, his anger is still there. His mind is still there. There's other, you know, the woman who was waiting for her lover on the highway and then got hit by a car and died, you know, but her love was so strong that there's still days if you drive down that highway, you see her ghost waiting for her lover. You know, you hear these stories, which is all about something is left behind, right? You know, your mind or your feelings, your emotions, your plans somehow linger on in the air, right? As a ghost or something. Unfortunately, the Bible doesn't tell us anything like that. The Bible tells us the exact opposite. It says, when you die, the electricity just ends. It goes back to God. The body turns back to dirt. And your mind, your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings, they just die. They cease to be. They no longer exist. This is just one verse. I'm going to show you other verses now that are a lot more detailed. All right. So Ecclesiastes, back to Ecclesiastes chapter 9, and starting from verse 4. Again, this is a little bit poetic, but I think you'll get the point. But for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. So while you're alive, you have hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. All right. Or in other words, you could be the most powerful creature, but if you're dead, who cares? You're dead. You could be a little mongrel, you know, a little skinny dog, but if you're alive, that's still better than a dead lion, right? That's what Solomon is saying there. So even if you're weak, even if you're small, if you're alive, you're already better than all the dead kings, all the dead princes, all the dead heroes in the past, because they're dead. Who cares, right? And then he explains the soul or the mind. All right. Verse 5. For the living know that they will die because they think, right? But the dead know nothing. So the dead thoughts, there's nothing there. And they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their memory is gone. So their knowledge is gone. Their memory is gone. Also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now perished. So all of their feelings no longer exist. There's no feelings floating around the house somewhere, you know. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. They're dead, simply put, you know, as simple as that. A lot of people don't like this. I'll be honest. A lot of people don't like this, and I'll explain why. People like the idea that, I'll use a mother, for instance. People like the idea that, you know, my mother died, but her soul is still with me, right? She can still hear me. She can still feel me. I can still talk to her, and she kind of talks to me and things like that. We like that because it gives us that connection. The problem is we don't fully think it through. It sounds good on paper, that idea. It sounds nice until you fully open it up. And I think we spoke a little bit about this last week, right? So imagine your spouse dies. Well, I'll use my wife again. I think I used my wife last week. My first wife died, right? Died of cancer. What would it be like for her seeing me with my new wife? You know, what would it be like for her seeing this other woman, you know, be a mother to her son and stuff like that? Again, it sounds good on paper until you realize that they're not just seeing the good things. They would see all the bad things, right? They would see all the mistakes. They would see all, you know, the times that you do something wrong, the times that, you know, all of that stuff. What the Bible teaches and said, which is what we talked about last week, is this idea of a rest, right? Like sleeping. When you sleep, you don't notice time changing, right? You just close your eyes, you open your eyes. So for instance, Adam and Eve, right? They died and thousands of years have passed, right? Like 6,000 years. But to them, when God comes back, they're going to think that it was like 2 seconds. Whoa, I just died and Jesus is back. Where all these people come from? You know, the earth didn't have all these people. What's going on? What are these buildings? What are these, you know, because it's like a blink of an eye. That's what the Bible tells us. In a blink of an eye, you're alive again. And that's what it feels like. And so the idea that, my mother died and she's going to have to, just wait years and years and years before they can see me again. Well, no, for them, it's a second. They're all going to wake up together, mother, daughter, mother, son. They'll wake up at the same time, and it'll be like for the mother, for the child, like it just happened, right? I just closed my eyes and here you are with me again. That's what the Bible teaches, which is actually a lot more humane, because it doesn't allow for people just to suffer for years and years and years, right? I watched a movie recently, a Christian movie, but that teaches kind of the other version of death, where this, the young girl, a little child, 6 years old or something like that, dies, or 5 years old, dies, and the parents suffer for years, right? Years pass, and then he sees a glimpse of her in heaven, and it's the idea that, she's in heaven waiting. She's been waiting years too to be with her parents again. That's not heaven. That's suffering. You want to be with the person. The way the Bible teaches it is, again, it's just that second, right? The person dies and they wake up and suddenly their whole family's together again. There isn't those years and years and years of waiting. So again, when you actually think about it in the long term, what the Bible teaches is actually more, humane, more loving in how it teaches death. Any questions there? I know I've been talking straight. Any questions at all?
So far, I don't have any questions. I just, I mean, this is stuff that's what I believed in. I mean, I remember losing my first child, and someone to comfort me said, he's looking down from heaven. And I knew that I didn't grow up with those beliefs. However, it was just like a way of comforting me.
It's a coping mechanism. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But I don't believe it.
Yeah, but here's the thing. That doesn't mean just because the person's sleeping, right? That's what the Bible calls it. That's what calls death, the first death. It's sleeping. Just because the person's sleeping or the person's dead, it doesn't mean you can't talk to them. It doesn't mean you can't, in your mind have that conversation, because, part of that person's mind, their thoughts, their ideas, their feelings, that's inside of you, right? For instance, if you know someone really well, in your mind, you can have a full conversation with them because you'll know exactly what they would say, right? How they would respond. And so let's say a mother dies, and the daughter, is in a situation and, I wish I could talk to mom. I wish I could have that conversation. Then, you know what, in your mind, do it. Just say, mom, what would you suggest in something like this? And in your own mind, you'll hear your mother. You'll hear that response because you know what your mother would say, right? And that's fine if that's what you need to cope and to grow. I'm not saying not to do that. What I am saying is the physicality of it isn't there, right? She's not suffering, waiting and watching you screw up or make mistakes. She's sleeping. She's at rest, right? Which is actually a good thing, because it means that they're not suffering. It means they don't have to suffer, through all of these things that are happening in the world. But no, you can still, have kind of those conversations because we know how people would react, right? All right, let me keep going. There's only, I think, a few more here. So continuing on in Ecclesiastes, this is actually one of my favorite couple of verses here in terms of how to live your life, all right? So it says this in verse 9, live joyfully with the wife who you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun. All your days are vanity, for that is your portion in life and in the labor which you perform under the sun. Right before this, it actually says, eat, drink, and be merry. Because that's what God has given you. So enjoy life, right? Why are you going to spend your whole life worrying? Why are you going to spend your whole life thinking about what you don't have? or what you aren't. God, Solomon's like, listen, take the few good things that you have and really enjoy it. Enjoy the fact when you sit down for a good meal. Enjoy the fact when you get to sleep beside your spouse, or spend some time with your kids, or see the success of your job and things like that. Enjoy those moments, because enjoyment only exists when you're alive. And this is where verse 10 comes in. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. So again, Solomon doesn't leave out anything. He talks about love and hate and envy and work, device, knowledge, wisdom. None of that exists when you die. It just stops, right? It's like you put on pause kind of a thing. You go to sleep. And so that's why Solomon says, you know what? Enjoy your life now. Wake up in the morning and be happy. Wake up in the morning and smile, because you're going to be able to enjoy a day. You're going to be able to do something you like if you choose, right? If you want, you can wake up miserable. You can wake up, and say, I'm not going to do anything good today. You can decide that, but you've just wasted a day, So use it. Enjoy the day. Wake up and plan something fun to do. Plan something enjoyable to do, because the truth is, we don't know how many days we get, right? We honestly don't. We don't know how many days we're going to live. So enjoy every one that you get, because when we die, there is no more thoughts. There is no more enjoyment or pain or anxiety or thoughts or plans. All of that simply stops. All right. Matthew 10. So, recently, no, not recently, maybe 15 years ago or so, the Catholic Church actually changed its stance, right? So the Catholic Church used to teach that there was a physical hell, right, under the earth somewhere, and a physical heaven, and then purgatory, and so on. John Paul II actually changed that. He did an encyclical, I think that's what they're called, where he says, listen, hell is not real, is not a physical place. Purgatory is not a physical place. When you die, your body dies. So there is no place where your body goes. But what the church does teach is that your soul continues living. So your mind, your thoughts, and that's what ends up suffering and burning and, in that eternal torment. Except the Bible doesn't teach that, right? So this is directly from Jesus now. This is Matthew chapter 10, verses 28. This is Jesus himself speaking. And it says this, and do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. In other words, human beings, or even the devil himself. The devil can only kill your body. Your soul is yours. You determine, your choices determine whether it goes to God and lives forever, or whether you give it up and yes, die. Human beings cannot kill your soul. They can only kill your body. And God and Jesus is telling us, listen, you don't have to fear those people, because there's something so much better after this world, right? That they can't touch, they can't decide for you. But rather fear him, and you'll notice that the H is big, right? That's talking about God. Fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So what gets destroyed in that fire that we talked about last week? Not just the body, but the soul as well. Everything that makes up who you are is destroyed, is killed, dies. All right. That's what Jesus teaches. That's what the Bible teaches. The body and the soul are destroyed in that hellfire, in that event, which we know isn't forever. It's a specific time period, right? So fear God. No, obviously don't fear God in a bad way. It's fear God in the sense that, I should think about what God wants from me. That's where my fears, my anxieties should be, because he's the one that determines my future, not human beings, not the devil. God is the one that's going to determine whether I live forever or I die forever. And that's the person then that I should follow. It's his advice that I should follow, so that he can save my body and soul from hell. All right. This is, it's not Matthew 10. Or maybe it is. I don't think it is. I'll have to figure out where this is coming from afterwards. You know what? Let me do a quick search here because I'm almost sure it's not Matthew 10. I don't think I changed the title there. Let me do a quick search here. It's a good thing for the internet.
Mhm.
King James. So the soul who sins. I just know because it's an Old Testament, so that's why I know it's not it's not Matthew 10. Come on, New King James, search Ezekiel 18. Ezekiel 18 verse 20. Yeah. So Ezekiel says the soul, right, not just the body, but the soul who sins shall die. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. In other words, the Jews used to believe that if your father was a sinner, then you were also a sinner, and you would die a sinner because you would connect with your family line. But God is telling us, no, you're saved by your own choices, by your own decisions. All right, so here's someone coming in, I guess, for the 7:30, a little early, but that's all right. And I think that's the last slide. So any questions at all? Any questions there about death?
Death is scary.
It is. No, and here's the thing. David, there is going to be a study at 7:30 in just a few minutes. Oh, he's still connecting in. Okay, good. It is. And you know what? We were never supposed to suffer death, which is why when we do experience death, it's such a mind-altering thing. We don't know how to deal with it because human beings weren't created to deal with death. This is a consequence of sin, right? And so it's difficult for us to deal with death because it's foreign. It's not made for us, which is why, I don't know if you've ever noticed when, you know, I do a lot of funerals, so I see it. But when someone dies, the reaction is so varied. Some people cry, some people laugh, some people get angry, some people get anxious, some people just close down, right? And it's because we all struggle to deal with it because it's not natural. Our bodies, our brains were not created to deal with it because we never should have died, right? We were created to be perfect and live forever, right? So that's why there's that struggle. But the Bible is very clear. So when you die, we spoke about this last week, right? It's like a sleep. You go to sleep.
It just occurred to me as you said, you can talk to somebody and you can you almost make up what they would say because you know them so well. And it occurred to me then that even if you talk to, say, a grave, and because the soul and the spirit has gone up to God, right?
Yeah. The spirit,
Could
right?
could they still hear you?
No, just because the spirit isn't the soul. They're two different things. All right. The spirit of a person is simply that spark of life, that electricity that makes the difference between the body in the casket and someone breathing and walking around, right? It's that spark of life that comes from God and only comes from God, which is why scientists and humans can't duplicate it. The soul, on the other hand, is completely different. The soul is what happens when that life force connects with a body and becomes alive. The second it becomes alive, the soul is born. You know, the person begins to feel and think and imagine and plan and have thoughts. But the second the body and the spirit separate again, the mind disappears again. It just
I understand now.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
Now, but the Bible does say this, that the memory of every single human being is with God. So think of God like a computer in that sense. And every single person is saved on that computer. There's like a little file that's like Nancy. And all your thoughts, all your ideas, everything that makes you is saved there. It's not alive, but it's saved. And the day God comes back and resurrects us, because we know we're going to have new bodies. We'll get to that when we get into Revelation.
So it's saved, but that's the end of it. There is no
it's like a
continuation.
pause. Yeah, so it's not that it continues thinking, but it's this file that has all your memory stored, right? It's like this little pocket of who you are, all right? And the day God recreates us and gives us the new body, then it's like it's downloaded into the new body. And for
cool.
you, and this is why I say, that's why the Bible calls it a sleep. For you, you don't notice that 100 years have passed by. Oh, I was in heaven for 100 years. No, for you, it's like you just open your eyes and no time has passed. Oh, I just got shot. I remember closing my eyes and now I'm opening my eyes again. Like in one, that's if you die from a gunshot. But for the person, it's 1 second. It's sleep. That's why the Bible uses that metaphor. It's like going to sleep. You close your eyes.
To everyone else who's outside,
they experience time.
To them,
yeah.
There is no time.
But for the person that dies, it's like a moment. It's just a moment.
Right.
So Dave, welcome. This is actually, I'm just wrapping up a Bible study that's from 6:30. But I will be starting the next Bible study, the one from scratch, at 7:30. So you could stay on there while we just chat after the Bible study. Anything else? Any other questions that you have? Either about death or really about anything? Because now it's just free time until 7:30. Anything you thought or read during the week that stumped you?
Well, I'm just reading Genesis at this moment.
Let me just stop.
There was someone